Hey guys, so this is going to be a quick talk through on trying to fix my AC system on my AW11 MR2. You can see here that I was actually working on replacing the oil pressure sending unit, and after pulling out the AC compressor, I decided to look into it. As a previous owner of my car said that it worked just fine. So the first thing I did was cleaned up all of the grease off the compressor, and then tested the resistance for the RPM sensor and tested the clutch functionality according to the Big Green Book, I think it's called, or the Toyota Service Manual. And everything seemed to be working correctly, so I decided to continue on. So you can see here that the model of the compressor is a 10P15C. I'm not sure if that came originally with the car. Everything I can see online points to the supercharged MR2s having a 10P13C model, but this was on it and was functioning, so I didn't really want to replace it as I couldn't find anything or any compressors that had the RPM sensor and seemed to be similar in design. Here's the picture of the exhaust side of the engine. You can see that new oil pressure sending unit. That's what I was looking at replacing when initially starting this repair. Unfortunately, I didn't realize how much had to come off to get to it. It was behind both the AC compressor bracket and the alternator bracket above it. But it was well worth it to stop the oil leak. Okay, the next thing I decided to do was to replace the oil out of the compressor. The Toyota service bulletin said that the compressor for my car, again the 10P13C, had an oil capacity of 100 cc's or 100 milliliters. And so I tried to measure out exactly how much oil would come out of the compressor, and it wasn't quite 100 milliliters, but it was close. I also decided to replace the seals. You can see here these two had some pieces that had kind of broken off, little fragments here and there. So because of that, I decided to also just flush the entire system, as it had been sitting for 10 years. I don't know what got in there throughout that time. And to also just replace all of the seals. Here are some of the soft lines with those new seals on them, ready to go back on the car after cleaning them up and flushing them out. Okay, and in flushing and replacing components in the AC system, I read online that you needed to, depending on what forum you were on, replace the expansion valve every time you open up the system. I decided to go ahead and do it since the car was so old, and I wanted to flush out the evaporator core anyway. You can see down at the bottom there was quite a bit of debris and leaves and whatnot that had gotten through over the years. I guess that's why they started implementing cabin air filters. But the expansion valve here is this guy off to the left. And when I replaced that and took that off, I saw quite a bit of crud in it, so I'm glad I decided to. Here's just a quick shot of inside the expansion valve. A lot of debris, so these are still easily accessible or easily available at the local Toyota dealer for like 40 bucks, I think. So I went ahead and replaced that. And then I used some compressed air to remove as much of this nasty debris from the evaporator core, fins, and just that whole assembly as I could. Also, good to know, the evaporator core is really easy to pull out of the dash. I did it in maybe 15 minutes and had never done it before. There's just a few screws to remove the glove compartment and the lower plastic trim, and then to get the core out itself, it was 5 or 6 screws, I think, and a couple connectors. Also good to know, there are a couple other components that are good to check functionality, one of which is the thermistor, which is just a resistor right here that measures or takes a temperature reading, and then the other is this black cable that goes around to the other side, and I believe that's the dual pressure switch. There's also a high pressure switch that is in the front, right next to where the high side valve for measuring the pressure in the system. And so I measured the resistance on those based on what the Toyota service manual said, and they all seem to be functioning perfectly, so I did not replace those. Okay, and then after all that, I put everything back together. I think the pack I bought of seals came with, I think, 25 green seals that are compliant with 134A. And I replaced every seal I could find between every line from front to back, and I think there were 21 or 22. And so after doing that and installing the system back up, I pulled a vacuum overnight and made sure that all the moisture and everything was pulled out of the system, and then shut it off just to make sure that it held vacuum, and then it did. And so after that, there was nothing left to do except start adding refrigerant and hope that the compressor kicked on. I will say one more thing. I did call an AC shop, since the Toyota service manual had said that when you replace the dryer, the evaporator, or the condenser, to add more oil. And so I did do that since I flushed each of those, since I flushed the evaporator and the condenser. I did replace the dryer, as the old one probably had been bad, and I think they're only like $10 anyway. So I replaced that, and all the oil I added to the system after flushing, I think including the oil in the compressor, was about 6 ounces or so, which I think is around 200 milliliters or cc's, somewhere around there. On the high, so here we go. It's no longer got a vacuum. It's climbing, that's good. It's filling up, it looks like it. Whew, whoo-hoo. The AC, it just clicked on. Holy crap. Holy crap. Okay, so you can see there in that video that the compressor kicked on, the AC started working. I filled the capacity, or the system, up to the 75% of the R12 capacity, which I think was about 550 grams of R134A, and you can see here that the temperature of the air coming out of the vents got down. I think it actually got down lower than 46, but that's the only image I have. So the AC is working. Until I took it for a drive and realized when I rev the engine, or when the engine spins up above 2000 RPM, you can hear this when the AC is on. So I'm not really sure what that is just yet. I know that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like a belt. My initial thoughts are either the thrush bearing within the compressor, which would require a rebuild, and I don't really want to do that, or possibly the clutch bearing, though I doubt that, since it only happens when the clutch is engaged, and so I'm not too sure yet, but I will post an update once I figure out and hopefully fix it. So that is how I fixed the AC, mainly, on my AW11 MR2.